As you
Well, I don't know. If you've already done some bhajans, maybe we can start to talk.
Yeah.
I was expecting Tridandi Swami to come. He's a priest, a sannyasi. Means like a priest. Renunciate. But he hasn't been able to come. Oh, has he just arrived?
He's new to everything.
I think you're hearing Jagannath, aren't you?
Oh, okay, sorry.
Their voices are very similar.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's Hasi.
Oh, okay, sorry.
He was going to come, and then I think he called and said he's not coming. Sorry?
I just thought you were saying, you point somebody was there, and I thought it was, has he come?
It was his brother, Jagannath.
Jagannath, okay.
Yeah. So I haven't thought of anything to say, but maybe we can talk a little bit about the basics of the bhakti process, if you're interested. We'll probably talk a little bit deeper if there was no, if it wasn't your first time.
But I think also for him.
No, it's good. I mean, normally on Saturday it's an open program, so it's not too in-house or formal.
But it's like maybe because because it's not so we are amongst us, and maybe he has questions. He has some experience with drugs and didn't go good, so. Then he was looking for some taste. He went one time to Watford, I think.
Yeah, I've been to the
So you can maybe just give him the help actually what he needs or what he can.
Did you have any questions in mind?
I guess I do, but I don't know if there's specifically to do with. Actually, no.
No.
I don't know the question.
I was going to say fire away.
Yeah.
Because what you may think is...
Okay, so...
What you may think is
so I'm struggling at the moment with kind of delusions and hallucinations. And I don't know how to... I guess because I was trying to tackle it from like a Buddhist perspective. So I was trying not to react to negative thoughts. And so I'm experiencing kind of voices, but also the way that I used to experience my mind. It's like it's been polluted by that. And so I'm having some quite frightening experiences. And because things have become so literal in my head, I don't know what to do. Like, is it just accepting? Is that just like, am I giving my power to some malevolent force that is then seems to have some sway over me when do you know what I mean? But then again, from the perspective of like psychiatry, that is just psychosis and it's a break from reality.
Right.
But unfortunately, it's my experience, so it's my
Yeah.
identity. If that makes sense.
How old are you now?
I'm 33.
And when did it start?
So I did a lot of party drugs when I was in my early 20s, and then I was sober for a little while, and then I got into, from a more healthy perspective, ketamine and psychedelics. But I was trying to do it.
So when did this so-called psychotic experiences start?
It was about 3 years ago.
Okay, so about 30.
My dad died, and afterwards I wanted to get back into spiritual stuff to try and deal with the emotions, and I just went that route. And I went off, and I thought I was becoming enlightened or something.
Oh, right.
Which is really annoying because I probably wouldn't have got so serious with it. But now it just seems to be a problem. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. Well, there are different levels of consciousness, and the ultimate foundation level of consciousness is known as the Atma, and that is pure consciousness. And the Atma is seen as something like a spark of pure consciousness, which is a part of a larger, infinite, I say larger, actually infinite consciousness known as God. The Atma, which is the individual, you call it the soul, right? So Atma is the Sanskrit word for the soul, and it's seen as a little minute spark of consciousness, which is actually us at the core level. So that is of the same quality as God. It's made of the same stuff, pure consciousness. Thanks, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Very good. Exactly the same composition. And the example is given of a drop of ocean water. You take a drop of water and you remove it from the ocean. The two are distinct from each other. The drop of water is not the ocean, but it's composed of exactly the same ingredients that constitute the ocean water. So the constituents are exactly the same. So much salt in there and a whole other mineral spectrum, and of course the water. So it's exactly the same as the ocean, but it's different from it. Largely in terms of its quantity. A drop of water, although the same constituents, does not have the same quantity as the ocean. So that's the example given to illustrate the relationship between the Atma, or the soul, the individual soul, all of us, everyone else, and the Supreme Soul, or God. The same quality, the same stuff, but on a different scale, a different quantity. So the my legs have gone dead. So when the soul naturally feels, because it's made of the same substance as God, then its connection with God is holistic, and it is the perfect condition for the individual soul. But because it's made of the same stuff as God, it has the same qualities of God, but just on a fractional level, a much smaller quantity. So one of the qualities of God is that whatever He wills, He can do. There's free will, independence. That is one of the qualities of God. And the individual soul, being part of God, also has that free will, albeit in much smaller quantity. So that free will can be used to separate oneself from the ultimate source, from the supreme consciousness, whatever you want to call God. We have a very refined concept of God known as the Krishna conception. But for purposes right now, we can just see God as a supreme consciousness and the individual soul as part of that. Later, you can understand the theistic development where God is ultimately expressed as the most beautiful person, the Krishna conception. But the foundation of that is that each individual soul has a relationship with the Supreme Soul. But they have free will. Just as the Supreme Soul has free will, the individual soul also has free will. And that can be used to separate oneself from the Supreme Soul and enter a world which is not of consciousness, which is made of something separate, such as the world around us. So, when the soul enters into, or chooses to live separately from God, Supreme Consciousness, then they enter into a environment which will facilitate that choice.
So when you say choice, what is that a conscious choice, or is that just, when you say soul, I get a feeling that you mean that a part of you that you're unconscious of, but is more aligned with your goals in life, that's the part of you that decides that, not you wouldn't just thinking ahead.
Yes, I'm talking on a fundamental level. So we'll get to your question. Will be answered in a very, very shortly. We're talking on on a primordial level. We're talking like on an original level where I'm just trying to explain some theory. So when the soul chooses to separate itself from God, from the Supreme Soul, then it enters into an environment which is separate from from divinity, from a natural spiritual consciousness. And it enters into a world of matter, which is the world around us, the material world. But it doesn't do so immediately. When it first enters into what is called this world of Maya, which is considered illusion, Maya means illusion, which as in it's not our true position or environment, condition or environment, then at first, or as it enters into this world, separate from God, then it assumes various coverings around it. So the Atma, the soul, pure consciousness, comes in to the world as we know it, but first on a subtle level. So the first covering that forms around the soul is known as ahankara, and that's the ego. It's a very subtle, it's made of material energy, it's not spiritual energy, but it's a very subtle body, very subtle covering. And that's a sense of identity separate from God, separate from the Supreme Consciousness. That's the first encasement. The ego, it's known as the ego. It's your sense of self separate from God, ahankara. And as the soul, the jiva, the atma progresses further into this Maya environment, this environment as we know it, it assumes another layer, encasement around it, which is known as buddhi, intellect. So once you have an ego, then an intellect forms to facilitate the desires of the ego. How am I going to serve my individual interest and purpose in this new environment, in this Maya, in this worldly material environment? You have to have an intellect, a discernment, which governs how the ego will serve its purpose. And that leads to a further encasement known as manas, or the mind. And the mind's function is to feel emotions and to will. So now you have an encasement, a subtle encasement around the pure consciousness of ego, of intellect, and of the mind, known as manas. And from there, these cannot be seen with the physical senses because the vibration is subtler. But from there, the last encasement is the physical body. The physical body forms around the Atma. So now you have 4 encasements: the ego, the intellect, the mind, and the physical body. And this is the grossest of the encasement. So what you have pure consciousness, the individual soul, and it's now being contained inside a physical encasement. And no longer is it fully aware, but it's only aware of what it can perceive through these openings in this encasement. And these are the senses: the eyes, the ears, the mouth, the nose. So although by nature the individual soul is fully conscious, it's known as chit, consciousness. Sat, chit, ananda, these are the 3 qualities. So chit, conscious. It has been forced into what you might call a dark encasement, and then little apertures have been put in that encasement to let the light in, so you can see outside, but only in a very limited range. So our eyes can only see a certain spectrum of light, right, between ultraviolet or infrared and ultraviolet. We can't see outside of a little sliver of light. And our ears can only hear a certain frequency range. We can't hear below a certain hertz or above a certain hertz. And our nose can only smell molecules that fit into the olfactory receptors. Only a small range of molecules will fit there. And we can only touch things that are within touching distance. And we can only, etc., hear a certain distance as well as a certain range. We can only taste things, again, whose molecules fit our taste receptors. So although by nature we are fully conscious, we've been put into this very closeted environment where we can only see our outside environment through little, you could say, little small limited spectrums, vision, smell, etc. And in this state, in this very limited state, the search for pleasure and satisfaction and fulfillment, that continues. But because it is so alien or so limited relative to the natural condition of consciousness, satisfaction is impossible. If something is by nature fully aware, and you take it and you put it in an environment where it can only see little slivers of light outside of the encasement, it's impossible for it to be satisfied. But nonetheless, using free will, we've found ourselves in this very limited, very handicapped environment. And the purpose of spiritual processes is to reverse that process, go back to the natural state, to put it basically. Then there's a little beyond that, but that's the essential foundation of the first step, the preliminary steps. Now, in relation to your question, because this environment, I've described the progression as you go from ego through intellect, mind, and down to the physical body, because it's unnatural, then it's liable to malfunction at each level, at each encasement is predisposed, almost, you could say, guaranteed to malfunction in some way at some time. That includes the physical body, subject to disease. The mind is subject to malfunction, to disease. So is the intellect, and so is the ego. All of these things are vulnerable to disease and malfunction. So when disease happens at the level of the physical body, we go to someone that's familiar with medicine, as like a doctor or a therapist, and they can treat it. The same thing happens at the level of the mind. Less is known because it cannot be seen with the physical senses. What is going on in the mind cannot be seen. Some people who have developed, you could say, what's called a siddhi, or it's like a psychic accomplishment. They can see the mind in the form of an aura, and they can see disturbances in the mind. Some people can. But the point being is that the process of bhakti, which is what we are culturing here, is aimed to cure the disease that can occur at each of these levels at the very root. So when you cure it at the root, then all of the disease on the lower levels, that eventually everything is cured. Like a wholesale return to health. So from that perspective, diseases of the physical body can be put in context. It's a temporary thing that happens to your body. Diseases of the mind, it's a temporary and inevitable thing that happens to your mind. But your mind is an encasement around your pure consciousness. That encasement will be diseased, but you yourself are not diseased. The Atma is not affected intrinsically by the worldly environment. The soul is not affected. And so it's said in one of our scriptures, our core scripture called the Bhagavad Gita, that the soul cannot be burnt by fire, it cannot be dried up by wind, it cannot be affected by anything, any adverse or positive condition of this world. Although it's trapped inside this world, it is not affected. It is eternal. So all of us here are eternal beings. And the experiences of misery we undergo, whether it be physical pain, mental pain, psychological pain, a sense of intellectual distortion, or what have you, all of that is temporary, but it's all inevitable, but it will all pass. So it's important to put it into context. And it can be treated directly, but to treat it at the very root, that's the ultimate solution.
And therefore it is separation from...
To reconnect with God is to put oneself back in the natural environment, the pristine, perfect environment, and that's the fundamental solution. That's the ultimate solution. And that is done there's been various processes throughout history to achieve that. And the process is, like everything, like any kind of process, it's suited, it's constructed to operate optimally in the environment of the time. So the environment that we currently live in, the age we currently live in, the process for the age, optimal for the age, is bhakti and congregational chanting, singing. Kind of like what was done before, singing of God's names. And what that does is it cleanses away all of this conditioning, which is characterized by these layers that form around the Atma. That is all purified. It's all purified on a fundamental level. And the soul can naturally free itself from these encasements known as Maya and return to its natural position. So that's the process. And in that process, all of the problems that are inherent to life in this world, as we mentioned, physical problems, mental problems, etc., what have you. You cannot escape problems. There's no possibility of lasting well-being in an inherently corrupted and temporary environment. It is antithetical to the very essence of who we are. But all of those problems are gradually solved, and they're solved at the root level. So that they're solved, never to return. That's the idea. And the bhakti process, the group chanting of God's names, the Hare Krishna mantra, and other processes of bhakti. Bhakti means devotion, cultivating love for God. They cure all disease. As they cure all disease at the root level, then the disease on the outer levels, that is addressed or that is put into context. That can be managed, dealt with, seen for what it is. Something that inevitably arises from time to time and causes some temporary pain, but goes away after some time. It doesn't last forever. It goes away after some time. And that can be, that perspective, that developed perspective, comes with an understanding of who we are and action based on that, action to address that, which is the purpose of this place. Understanding about our identity relative to our current position, and working to realize our true identity, and then act based on that. And a realization of the true identity puts into perspective all of the problems that occur on the superficial coverings, the mind, the body, etc. So it is the ultimate healing process if it's performed with sincerity, because it heals on all levels. It peels away all of these coverings that are vulnerable to disease, that cause pain. And it frees one permanently, forever. And what is that freedom? What is that state of freedom? It's known as Satchit Ananda. So it's eternal, it's fully conscious, fully aware, and it has a quality of Ananda, bliss, happiness. That's the natural position of you, myself, everyone. But we're not in that natural position now, right? We all have sufferings of various kinds. You were talking about, honestly, about your sufferings, of a mental nature. And you can speak to anyone in this world, and if they're honest with you, they will tell you about things that are far from ideal, things that are causing them problems in this world, as they identify with their physical body, which is a covering around who they are, as they identify with their mind, which is another covering, etc. And so the purpose here, at this place, and of any genuine spiritual group, is to address these core issues and solve them once and for all. Not put a band-aid over not like a patchwork solution, putting a band-aid over a symptom, disguising a symptom, suppressing, but addressing the real core issue and addressing it at its root, so that it can be solved once and for all. And we can find that happiness, that love and that beauty and that ecstasy, which is our nature inside. That's the purpose of it. And ultimately, that is found in a relationship with God as a person. So one of our scriptures called the Srimad Bhagavatam says that God has, although God is one, it's expressed in three ways. One of those ways is an impersonal, as God is a conscious light energy permeating everything. This is known as Brahman. And the second is known as Param Atma, which means the supreme soul. And the soul, God is individualized and sits next to the Atma, the soul, the consciousness of who we are, our real identity, sits in the heart area. And next to every individual soul sits the supreme soul, also localized, sitting right there. And that help is available regardless of what traumatic circumstance you might enter into. You might even think you're in hell subjectively. Many of us in this unnatural environment go through very painful experiences that really, figuratively, they may be considered hellish. But nonetheless, the individual soul is never abandoned by God. Wherever they are, and you can go to different realms. This earthly realm is just one of many different places one can go, different levels of consciousness. Everywhere the soul goes, God goes as well. This is known as the Paramatma. Paramatma, supreme soul. Param means supreme, or super, sometimes translated as super. And Atma is the soul. So it means like the supreme soul, sitting next to the Atma. And the third expression of God is known as Bhagavan. So the verse in the scripture that I referred to is Vadanti tattva vidas tattvam yaj jnanamadvayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavan iti sabditi. So brahmeti, paramatmeti and Bhagavan. So Brahma, all pervasive, Paramatma, localized in the heart, and Bhagavan, when God appears as a person. So we worship the Bhagavan, the Bhagavan aspect of God. And on that basis, you can say, what is God? When you conceive of God as a person, then you say, God, he must be all-powerful, right? God cannot not be all-powerful, then they wouldn't be God. So they must have full power. And God must know everything. If he can't know everything, then he can't have full power. So he must be what's called omniscient. He must know everything. And omnipotent, full power. Many faiths, this is their realization of Bhagavan, of God. That must be a person with full power and full consciousness. What we practice here is the Bhagavan conception, the personal conception of God, but the power and the omnipotence and the omniscience is sidelined, because a deeper investigation of Bhagavan reveals that yes, he has full power and full awareness, full knowledge, but he also has full beauty. He's also the most beautiful, loving person. So whereas some faiths might stop at the idea of the all-powerful being, the all-knowing being, the bhakti conception, the devotion, bhakti yoga, connecting with God via devotion and love, must necessarily see God as the most beautiful person. And that is the pinnacle. Developing a relationship with the most beautiful person is the pinnacle of perfection. for each individual soul in the whole of creation. Why? Because it provides the greatest ecstasy and joy. And that's what we're all looking for, to move away from pain and to move towards pleasure. Not just any pleasure, but the most developed, the most fulfilling, powerful pleasure, charm, ecstasy, beauty, love, sweetness. This is what every conscious entity, being, every being in creation is looking to move away from pain and move towards pleasure. And what we are culturing here is to facilitate that. So when I said to get rid of all the sufferings, we move away from the pain. And the positive side is to develop a relationship with Krishna, the most beautiful person, God, Bhagavan, the most refined conception of God as a person. God is the most beautiful, loving, sweet person, whom having a relationship with provides perfection of the highest variety and joy of the highest possible variety in creation. So that's a basic introduction to what's going on here.
That's really cool, thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks.
And once it's practiced, that's the theory of it. The practice of it brings it into one's life for real. So associating with people that are trying to do the same thing is quite important, because their energy helps you along the path. Or I could use helps me, helps all of us. That's what this building is for. So we can get together and help each other on this path that I've described, on this journey. And when you are around people that are further along on the path than you, it lifts you up. It cleans you on a subtle level. So you become spiritually healthier and more fulfilled. So we're all engaged in the healing process here. But the healing is, the objective of the healing is healing that cures a disease at the root, as I was saying. And we're all helping each other along this path. So everyone is welcome to participate, to engage. There's no obligation, there's no coercion. But it comes highly recommended for everyone. The invitation is open.
Seconded, recommended.
Recommended. The invitation is open. I have an open invitation.
Yeah.
Do you have any further questions?
No, that was really great. Thank you for that.
Okay, welcome. Should we do some kirtan or something? Is it kind of time for that? Or should I can talk some more if you like on something else. Arti's at 1:30. Also, in the process, we have a lineage of teachers, and you can see the most recent ones here, starting from the left-hand side here and moving along. Most recent, and there is more persons in the lineage. This is just the most recent of the teachers, and the lineage forms a channel through which spiritual energy flows. So when one comes and participates in the bhakti process and wants to involve themselves further, then there's a process of connection with this lineage. And this lineage dates back all the way to Krishna. And Krishna, as described, being God, the most beautiful person. Krishna's energy flows through this lineage known as the Parampara, and connecting with it is tapping in to the spiritual energy which enacts a healing process in one's life And it's a infusion of spiritual consciousness which leads to joy and happiness. But ultimately, in your position, it's akin to someone also with a physical disease. It's just a little more subtle. When you experience pain in your mind, many of us have been through it. I've been through it in my younger years. I experienced much pain in my mind. The important point to note is that while one is subject to that pain, then it can seem overwhelming. It can seem difficult to process. But it's important to recognize that it's temporary. It's not you. It's something you're identifying with that is malfunctioning. And it will pass. It is a result of karma. You've heard of karma? So when the Atma comes into this world and performs actions through the physical body, then it activates the physical laws. And karma can be described as Newton's third law of motion, where every reaction is preceded by an equal action. Or it can be described the other way. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. This is a physical law. So, although the Atma is free and non-physical, it's spiritual. When it's in this material world, it's subject to physical laws. So whatever actions you do, they create a reaction. So it's inevitable that some actions are not in our best interest. We're misguided, not sure what to do for our own best welfare and best interest. And it's not helped by the fact that we're living in an age where society's leaders will tell you that God doesn't exist. All that exists is what you can perceive with your senses. That's what we're told. That the world as we know it came about by some accident, by some chance happening. Which means there's no reason to life. There's no reason for the world. There's no purpose. There's no objective. Essentially meaningless. And this causes a lot of problems for people. They're trying to figure out, I'm a conscious being, what's my purpose? Yet the elders, the so-called intelligentsia of our society, tell you there's no purpose. You live once and then you die and that's it. So we counter that. We say it's completely bogus. Everything has a purpose. Everything has a reason. And even logically, if you look at the intricacy and sophistication of our natural world, to suggest it came about by chance, irrational thinking. If I was to suggest to you that this table, or even something more sophisticated, bring in a laptop, or this camera here, if I was to tell you it came about by chance, you'd call me cuckoo, right? I said it just materialized. There was some kind of chemical reaction and it happened. It's a ridiculous assumption. So to say that something infinitely more sophisticated than a piece of technology, our entire cosmos, came about by chance, it's a very irrational position to take. And not just that, it's a very depressing and pessimistic position to take, because it leaves no light, leaves no purpose, nothing to work for. You must bury your head in the sand and go, oh, I'm going to enjoy my life while I can because I die and that's it. There's no reason apart from temporary sensual stimulation. And to say that that is the purpose of life, just some temporary stimulation, and then consciousness fades away eternally when the physical body dies, relative to what our actual potential is, pleasure potential as eternal souls, that's a very pessimistic, it's like a death cult almost. It's extremely pessimistic and depressing. But that is what is being taught in the schools, the universities, by the so-called leaders of our society. So also in a sense here we're going against that. We're going for the truth, and the truth is happiness. And it's love. Spiritual life. That's our position here. Alright, shall we finish now? Do some arti. 1:30.
And it's that time?
I think it's that time, is it not?
1:30.
And that function.
Does most of that make sense?
Yeah, it's not food for thought.
A lot of food for thought.
Yeah, but yeah, it does.
I started with a kind of an abstract, like I said, like a primordial description of how the soul separates from, just to try and describe the background, theoretical background of why we're doing what we're doing here. And the soul, the individual, Atma's relationship with God.
I do have one question for you.
Yes.
So you spoke about the soul being impervious to everything around it, basically.
Not impervious, but unaffected on a fundamental level.
Okay.
Yes.
Because my question is the part of us that feels pleasure and pain.
Mm-hmm.
What part of us is that? Is that the soul that feels that, or is that like an emotion? Is there an emotional body involved with this?
It's a good question. The soul does indeed feel it, because ultimately consciousness is what's feeling. Consciousness is experiencing the environment, and that consciousness sits with the soul. That consciousness is the soul. But it's felt, so the soul feels it through misidentification with something that it's not. So imagine this scenario where I'm identifying with a car. For instance, I'm driving the car. So the soul is the, in this metaphor, the soul is the driver of the car, the motor vehicle, right? So he's sitting in the seat, steering, driving the car. Let's hypothesize that he's identifying with the car. Now, some people do identify somewhat with their cars, but imagine that he's fully identifying physically with the car. Now, the car has an accident, and the front is smashed, and the window's smashed, etc. If that person is falsely identifying with the car, he's going to experience pain, but he's not actually going to be damaged himself. He'll still be intact, but because he's misidentifying himself with something that is not, he will feel pain. But he shouldn't be feeling pain. And he's not actually damaged, but he still is feeling pain.
That's perfect. Okay.
Yeah. You understand now, yeah? So the purpose here is to reverse that misidentification process and to start identifying with who we really are. And thus it's being described as self-realization, when you realize who you actually are. Like the driver stopping misidentifying with his car. And all the problems, then all the problems that the car will undergo no longer are causing the driver any pain. Because he's understood now who he is. Oh, I'm not the car, I'm not this contraption that's surrounding me. I'm not this physical contraption that I'm identifying with as me. And when this is fully done, all the fears, all the problems, intrinsic, inherent to this physical body, no longer cause pain on a deeper level. And all the problems that are intrinsic to the subtler covering, the mind, they no longer cause pain either. That's the whole idea. Elimination of pain at the deeper level, and then a positive engagement with Krishna. Service, loving relationship with Krishna, which achieves, which brings about the greatest of joys, the greatest proper satisfaction. So the root of the problem lies with misidentification, for starters. On the physical and the mental level, and the deeper levels. But we're here to cleanse that. There's one verse by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu who established this process 500 years ago in India. And he says that the process of congregational chanting, is known as Sankirtan, it has a cleaning effect on the mind. And he describes consciousness as like a mirror. And that mirror is covered in a thick layer of dust. So if you go to a mirror and it's covered in a film of dust, you cannot see yourself in that mirror. So he describes the effect of this process we perform, we engage in, called Sankirtan, or congregational chanting of Krishna's names, as cleaning that mirror. And when the mirror is clean, you see yourself in the mirror. So through this process of Sankirtan, we begin to see who we actually are, beyond the coverings of the physical body, the mind, the intellect, etc. We see who we actually are. And that is the first proper level of spiritual realization. Self-realization is known as Atma-gyan, knowledge of the self. And from there, we can ask the question, okay, what does the soul like to do? Oh, it searches for love and happiness. And then we can begin our relationship with Krishna, the spiritual world, positive, loving relationship. And it's very real when you encounter this theology, philosophy for the first time. It's something that, like you said, food for thought. It takes a bit of digestion, contemplation. It's not taught in the schools, unfortunately. But the real effect comes with practical application. One must perform the experiment. Can't just hypothesize, form a hypothesis without performing the experiment. So the experiment must be performed, and then you judge the results from there. That's the bhakti process, engagement in the bhakti process. And the first one of our spiritual teachers, the head of our school actually, known as Rupa Goswami, he's a direct follower of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He says in a book that the first effect of applying this bhakti process is that it alleviates material suffering. It alleviates your pains, your suffering. That's the first effect. That's the initial effect. So it's worth going beyond the theoretical level and performing the experiment. Yeah, you're welcome. Jai Shri Gurudev Ki Jai.
Shri Radha Pandit Prabhu Ki
Jai.
Maybe you can explain something of the arti. Like we do have arti now. That is glorifying the Lord.
You went to Bhaktivedanta Manor and you saw the altar there with the deity, the figures on it.
I think so, yeah.
We have that here. The figure on the altar is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he is seen as Krishna, God, who appeared 500 years ago in India to teach this method. And what we're doing now, the singing, and you'll see the worship being done, is to worship Mahaprabhu, and it's part of the bhakti process to connect with Krishna.
A part of your part.
You can just go along with it, it's no big deal.
Jai.
So this is just wonderful. You like it.
What is this though? It just goes in the corner. Vajase Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Vajase Krishna
Jai.
Jai Shri Guru